On March 14, 2025, Mark Carney was sworn in as Canada's Prime Minister. This marked a pivotal moment in Canadian history. Carney, a renowned economist, brought a wealth of experience. His leadership was eagerly anticipated. Canadians hoped for stability and strong guidance. Mark Carney's rise to power was inextricably linked to the tumultuous presidency of Donald Trump. Trump's return to the White House in 2024 sent shockwaves through Canadian politics. His America First policies and unpredictable behavior created a climate of anxiety and uncertainty north of the border. Carney's background as a respected international figure, having led both the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England, stood in stark contrast to Trump's nationalistic rhetoric. Canadians saw in Carney a leader who could stand up to Trump's bullying tactics and defend Canadian interests on the world stage. Moreover, Trump's presidency had emboldened right-wing populist forces within Canada, most notably represented by Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the Conservative Party. Poilievre echoed Trump's divisive rhetoric and sought to capitalize on the anxieties fueled by Trump's presidency. In this context, Carney emerged as a voice of reason and moderation. His calm demeanor and reasoned approach offered a stark contrast to the bombast and chaos of the Trump era. Canadians, weary of the constant drama and division, gravitated towards Carney's promise of stability and competent leadership. Interestingly, the political turbulence of the Trump era did not solely benefit populist movements. A counter-trend emerged, particularly in Western democracies. Leaders like Keir Starmer in the United Kingdom, Emmanuel Macron in France, and Friedrich Merz in Germany gained traction by occupying the political center. They presented themselves as pragmatic problem solvers in contrast to Trump's brand of disruptive politics. This new wave of centrist leaders understood the anxieties that fueled populism. They acknowledged concerns about immigration, globalization, and cultural change. However, instead of exploiting these anxieties for political gain, they offered practical solutions rooted in evidence-based policymaking. These leaders recognized the importance of international cooperation and multilateralism in addressing global challenges. They sought to rebuild trust in institutions and reassert the values of liberal democracy that Trump had so often undermined. Their success demonstrated a growing appetite for moderation and a rejection of the divisive politics championed by Trump and his ilk. This global shift towards the center ground provided a favorable backdrop for Carney's political ascent. It suggested that voters were increasingly looking for leaders who could offer stability, competence, and a commitment to democratic norms and institutions. European leaders faced the daunting task of managing relations with the unpredictable and often hostile Trump administration. They adopted a range of strategies, often walking a tightrope between confrontation and cooperation. Some, like French President Emmanuel Macron, initially attempted to engage Trump personally, hoping to forge a bond and influence his decision-making. Others, like German Chancellor Angela Merkel, took a more pragmatic approach, focusing on areas of common interest while firmly pushing back against Trump's more egregious policies. They recognized the importance of maintaining transatlantic unity on issues like trade and security, even as they navigated deep disagreements on climate change, Iran, and NATO. One common thread among European leaders was the need to publicly counter Trump's falsehoods and misrepresentations. They understood that allowing Trump's pronouncements to go unchallenged would seed the narrative and undermine public trust in democratic institutions. This often involved correcting the record in press conferences, issuing public statements, and engaging in direct diplomacy to challenge Trump's version of events. European leaders also recognized the importance of demonstrating their independence from the United States. They pursued their own foreign policy initiatives, strengthened ties with other global powers, and sought to diversify their economic relationships to reduce their dependence on the United States. This assertive approach, while sometimes prompting criticism from Trump, ultimately earned them respect both at home and abroad. Section 5. A looming shadow. Trump's threats to Canadian sovereignty cast a pall. Trump's presidency cast a long shadow over Canada. His America First agenda often came at the expense of Canadian interests. He imposed tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum, threatened to tear up NAFTA, and repeatedly disparaged Canada as a national security threat to justify his protectionist policies. Trump's rhetoric went beyond economic disputes. He questioned the legitimacy of Canadian sovereignty over the Arctic, a region of growing strategic importance. He also made disparaging remarks about Canadian history and culture, further straining relations between the two countries. These actions and pronouncements generated considerable anxiety among Canadians. They feared that their close relationship with the United States, a cornerstone of Canadian foreign policy for decades, was under threat. They worried that Trump's unpredictable behavior and disregard for international norms could have serious consequences for Canadian security and prosperity. Carney recognized the need to address these anxieties. He pledged to stand up for Canadian interests and defend Canadian sovereignty against Trump's aggression. At the same time, he also emphasized the importance of maintaining a constructive relationship with the United States, recognizing the deep economic and cultural ties that bind the two countries. Section 6. A balancing act, Carney's delicate dance between campaign promises and diplomatic realities. Carney's election presented a unique challenge. During the campaign, he had criticized Trump's policies and rhetoric. He promised to be a strong voice for Canadian interests on the world stage. However, as Prime Minister, he now had to balance these campaign promises with the realities of governing a country deeply integrated with the United States. Carney understood that confrontation with Trump, while potentially popular domestically, could have negative consequences for the Canadian economy and for cross-border cooperation on issues like security and climate change. He therefore adopted a two-pronged approach. Publicly, Carney remained a vocal critic of Trump's policies, particularly those that directly harmed Canadian interests. He used international forums like the G7 and the United Nations to call out Trump's protectionism and his attacks on the rules-based international order. Behind the scenes, however, Carney worked to build relationships with key figures in the Trump administration and with members of Congress. He sought to find common ground on issues like trade and energy, while also making it clear that Canada would not be bullied or intimidated by the United States. Section 7. Words of Wisdom, Jean Chrétien's counsel to Canada's new leader. Before assuming office, Carney sought advice from his predecessors, including former Prime Minister Jean Chrétien. Chrétien, known for his own deft handling of Canada-US relations, particularly during the George W. Bush administration, offered some sage counsel. He emphasized the importance of understanding the United States' perspective, even when disagreeing with its policies. He urged Carney to avoid personalizing disputes with Trump and to focus on building relationships with other influential figures in Washington. Chrétien also stressed the need for patience and perseverance. He reminded Carney that the Canada-US relationship was bigger than any one individual and that it had weathered many storms in the past. He encouraged Carney to stay focused on the long game and to avoid making rash decisions that could jeopardize the deep and enduring ties between the two countries. Carney took Chrétien's advice to heart. He understood that managing the Canada-US relationship in the age of Trump would require a delicate touch, a cool head, and a steadfast commitment to Canadian interests. Section 8. The Art of Diplomacy. Carney's approach to navigating the treacherous waters of US-Canada relations. Carney's approach to diplomacy was characterized by a blend of firmness and pragmatism. He understood the need to stand up for Canadian values and interests, but he also recognized the importance of maintaining a functional relationship with the United States. One of his key strategies was to diversify Canada's international partnerships. He strengthened ties with European countries as well as with Asian powers like China and India. This diversification served two purposes. It reduced Canada's economic dependence on the United States, and it provided Carney with more leverage in negotiations with the Trump administration. Carney also focused on building coalitions with like-minded countries to counter Trump's more damaging policies. He worked with European leaders to uphold the Iran nuclear deal, and he joined forces with other countries to criticize Trump's withdrawal from the Paris Climate Accord. While Carney's approach did not always yield immediate results, it did earn him respect on the world stage. He demonstrated that Canada was not afraid to chart its own course, even when it meant disagreeing with its powerful neighbor to the south. Section 9. The Path Ahead. Charting a course for the future of US-Canada relations under Carney's leadership. As Carney settles into his role as Prime Minister, the future of Canada-US relations remains uncertain. The Trump administration's policies have undoubtedly strained the relationship, But the underlying economic and cultural ties between the two countries remain strong. Carney's challenge will be to navigate this complex landscape while upholding Canadian interests and values. He will need to find ways to work constructively with the United States on areas of mutual interest such as trade and security, while also pushing back against policies that harm Canada. The success of Carney's approach will depend in part on the actions of the Trump administration. If Trump continues to prioritize his America First agenda at the expense of his allies, it will be difficult to repair the damage that has been done to the relationship. However, if Trump shows a willingness to engage with Canada in a more respectful and cooperative manner, there is hope that the two countries can rebuild trust and find common ground. Ultimately, the future of Canada-US relations will depend on the choices that both countries make in the years to come.